Well, hello, my friends. I'm sure you know I really like my Priority 600X, but what I wanted to do was make it even more enjoyable for me to ride. And I had often thought about making a change on the front end of the bike. You know, the mountain bike fork that it comes with is a Wren inverted fork. It's a very nice fork. It's very heavy. For the kind of riding I do, I don't need a suspension fork on the front end. So I thought about changing the bike to a rigid mountain bike. Because all I do is bike packing. I go for rides when I'm at home on it without all my bags and everything. But for the most part, I'm not going down single track, going over jumps or very rocky technical terrain. So I contacted the Priority company and I said, do you guys have another fork, a solid fork, and get rid of the 4.5-pound fork that I have and go with something lighter? And they said, no, they don't. But they had a solution, and that was to steer me toward the Whiskey No. 9 carbon solid fork. They said it would fit perfectly on this bike. It has the same critical dimension from the crown to the axle, so you wouldn't end up having your bike sitting at an angle. You know, it wasn't going to be a shorter fork. It was going to give you the same plane on the bicycle. I thought that might be a pretty good idea. So I bought the thing, and here it is. It's a rather nice looking fork. It will enable me to put my Salsa Anything cages on either side of it. Here are the mounts for the brake assemblies, and it's quite light. It comes in at about 24 ounces. So now all I have to do is take this fork off and put the new fork in, cut off the top of it, and we'll be good to go. So the fork comes from the Whiskey Company, and the model, the No. 9 Mountain Boost LT. I'll put a link in the description below if anybody's interested in taking a closer look at this fork. And the mounts on either side of the fork enable you to carry 8.8 pounds of stuff. So I think that will cover all of the lightweight items that I carry with me on a tour on the front fork of a bike. And the fork only weighs 24 ounces, so we're going to get scientific. I'm going to weigh that fork and see how close it is to what the manufacturer says and compare it to the weight of the Wren fork. They also say that the rider weight should be no more than 240 pounds. But I have to keep in mind that I ride this bike as a fully loaded bike packing touring bike. So even taking that into consideration, I fall well below the recommendation for their weight max. So now let's start taking off the Wren fork and preparing my new fork to install it on the bike. What possibly could go wrong? So first, let's take the front wheel off. Now let's release the brake cable. Next, we can loosen up and take off the brake assembly. Now let's take the stem cap off. And now the stem. So now let's weigh both of these forks. So the Wren fork weighs 4 pounds, 11 ounces. And the new Whiskey fork weighs 1 pound, 8 ounces. So that's quite a big weight savings, isn't it? So now it's time to fit the new fork on the bike. So it's the next morning, and last night when I was getting ready to dry fit the fork, I realized there was a very critical task ahead of me, and that was to fit the crown race onto the new fork. So this item's called the Crown Race, and it's a press fit onto the top of the fork, and I didn't have the tools to do that. I could buy the tools from Park Tool for $99, and I don't think I'm going to be using that kind of a tool very often, but when you need it, you need it. So what did I do? I went to my local bike shop, So the head mechanic had the tools to perform this operation, and he got it done in about less than a minute. It's a very critical operation. You don't want to crack the fork, you don't want to scuff it up. And since this is a press fit, you do need that special tool to go over the top of the fork here and pound it down with a mallet. And now we're going to go to the next step and dry fit it so that we can get all the proper dimensions so I can then cut the top of this fork. It's very critical. I don't want to cut it too short. So I've got the bearings in place. Now I'm going to insert the fork. Put on my high-rise stem. So I tightened it just enough to keep the fork from falling out onto the floor. Next, install a 10mm spacer. Then the instructions tell us to use a felt tip marker and mark around the top of this spacer and then disassemble everything. So I spared you the task of watching me cut this to the proper size after I took all those measurements. So now the next thing we're going to do is grease up the headset bearings and put this thing back together. Well, I'm putting the fork back in after I reinstalled and greased up the lower bearing. Now I'm going to put the stem back on. Once again, tightening up the stem just a little bit so it won't fall off onto the floor. Put the spacer on top. So now I'm going to install the compression plug. So now I'm going to tighten everything up and go to the next step. So I installed the fork, and you can see the steerer tube is coming up through here, and I put the compression plug in here. Compression plug's used because this is a carbon tube right here, and it's rather soft. And so when you put the stem on and you clamp the screws down, you don't want this thing to split. So there's reinforcement in here. And what I've already done is I've used my torque wrench, and per the specifications, they said to tighten it to 8 Newton meters. Slip on the stem, put on the spacer that goes above it, and now I can put the top cap on, although I'm not going to tighten it up yet. So I grease the threads on the top cap, and I'll use a 4mm hex wrench to put this on. And just like that, it's installed. I think that's a nice looking fork. The fork gives a little more angle forward than the Wren fork. It actually adds a little over 1/2 inch to my wheelbase. This should give a little more comfortable ride since you get the dampening effect that carbon gives you. And if I decide I want to get even a more comfortable ride, all I need to do is let a little air out of my tires. Well, now that the bike's all done, I'd really like to go out and take it for a ride, but oh well. In a few days it's going to clear up and the roads will be dry, so looking forward to that. So once again, thanks for watching, and as always, happy pedaling.